In this video, you will see a lot of interesting positions about the Rook endgames, such as Rook versus Pawns, Rook versus Rook, and so on. In this position, it is white to move, and it is obvious that this pawn needs to go as far away as possible to promote to the queen. White plays f7. Black wants to stop the pawn, but there is no direct way. There is no rook e8 because the pawn controls it, no rook f5 because king is just standing there. That's why the only choice what black has got is to give some check rook e6. White's king can't go up to the 7th rank to help the pawn because there will be rook e7, and it actually leads to a draw. Rook f7, king f7, which probably will be very logical result if not a specific situation what we have on the board. White doesn't want to move the king along the h-file either, because there will be rook f6 and white immediately loses the game on spot, therefore plays king g5. To stay in touch with the f-file, there is no rook f6, there is no rook e8, and black is forced to play rook e5 check. White comes down to g4, uses exactly the same technique, rook e4 as we already discussed, king g3, rook e3, and king f2. Right now, black no longer has this choice of coming back to e1 followed by rook f1, which would have been the case if, let's say right here, white goes king f5, there is rook e1 followed by rook f1. That's why white cannot promote the pawn. So after king g4, rook e4 check, king g3, rook e3, and king comes to f2, black no longer can put the rook along the f-file easily. The position is not over yet. Black can stop the clock after 2 moves. Rook e4 first. It is important to not promote the pawn automatically to the queen. If you're playing this position online on chess.com, I highly recommend you to click the shift button, which means that auto promotion to the queen will be disabled. But if you play over the board, it's not an issue. So promote the pawn to the rook. It's one of the rarest cases when king and rook versus king and rook is winning. The reason is because black's king is horribly placed and stuck on the h-file, so rook h8 is a real threat. Rook h4 is the only choice, and here white goes with king g3, attacking the rook and threatening rook f1 at the same time. There is not much what black can do about it, and simply resigns. You're probably wondering, why not f8 queen then? Why is f8 rook the best option? Because there is rook f4 check, and if white takes it back, it's a stalemate. Black's king has nowhere else to go. Can white survive in this position? Let's figure it out. It is black to move, white returns g8 queen. It requires special attention for black, so forcing moves such as rook f6 or rook a7 makes perfect sense. In case of rook f6, this move is not really that great, because there is king e7, threatening g8 queen, forces black to go rook g6, king f7, and white easily reaches to desirable result. So black goes with rook a7 check, and here it is important to bring the king on g8 followed by h8. White has these stalemate ideas if there are b and g files on the board, so be cautious about that. You play from stronger side, pay attention, try to avoid it by all means. After king g8, logical move would be to play king g6, because in case of rook a8, white goes king h7, threatening g8 queen. If rook a7, we go king h8, threatening g8 queen again. So king goes on g6, and white goes for this brilliant move, king h8. g8 queen is a real threat, and the only shot what black has got is to capture the pawn, which leads to a stalemate position. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to subscribe the channel and click the like button, because whenever we reach 10,000 subscribers, we will have a free giveaway, free video courses from my website. We discussed about this technique a little bit earlier in king and pawn endings, but I would like to repeat that, the shouldering technique. Black wants to promote the h-pawn to the queen, but playing h2 right away is a big blunder, because white responds with rook g8, kicks the king out from the g-file and forces to go along the h-file, and white can play king f2. h1 queen will not be good because of rook h8 and the queen will be lost very soon. And if king h4, of course, there is king g2. So black's only shot here is to promote to the knight, but typically if you promote it at the edge of the board on a1, h1, a8 and h8 squares, it's not really recommended because it will lead to a losing position. So after playing king f3, the knight can't go on g3 or f2, of course. King h4 will lead to rook h8 followed by rook h1, so king h2 is the only option, but white can wait. Just play rook g7, and black is in Zugzwang. Knight can't go anywhere, and in case of king h3, white just makes a checkmate. So after considering all this that h2 doesn't work, even though it looks very logical, Black plays the strong move king g2. This is the best option what you have got, because when you're playing with king and pawn versus king and rook, you are not really that much afraid of the rook itself. You don't want to allow enemy's king to get closer, and king g2 does exactly that. After this move, white doesn't have enough time to play king e2 and after h2 try to force you to go along the h-file, because unlike in the previous situation, when our king was ending up on h3, we have an option of coming back to going down to h1. And when the king gets to h1 square, we automatically get to stalemate territory. So white doesn't have enough time to play king f2 because the king has nowhere else to go. It forces white to move the rook away from the g-file, such as rook h8, which leads to king g2 followed by h1, and it will lead to a drawish position. That's why after king g2, instead of playing king e2, more logical way for white to play rook g8 check. To ask some questions, where does our king go? And it is very important to play king f1 right now. It looks very suspicious because the king goes far away from the h-pawn, and the pawn always needs to be protected, but it is fine because it's not attacked, and black wants to play h2 on the very next move. And by playing king f1, we are controlling the key squares, and white's king cannot get anywhere close to that. So after king f1, if white plays king rook h8, we go king g2 with a big smile on our face because h2 is there. And after rook g8, we know that there is king h1. And here, if instead of rook h8, white decides to do anything else, like king f3 or whatever, there is h2, rook goes to h8, king g1, and it's impossible to stop the pawn's promotion. Now let's move on to legendary Lucena position. I'm sure you have heard about it at least once if you have studied any kind of endings connected to the rooks. So, white has an extra pawn, who wants to promote the pawn to the queen as soon as possible. But first, we need to move the king away from e8. If white plays king d7 right away in order to promote the pawn immediately, it will lead to a drawish position. Even though black's king can get closer because it's cut by enemy's rook, it is still enough for black to make a draw because there is rook a7, very annoying check. White has to stay connected to the pawn and go on c6 or c8 without losing the pawn on e7. For instance, king d8, there is rook a8, king can come up to c7, but there is again rook a7. King has to stay in contact to the pawn, and because of these endless checks, black manages to make a draw. And if this king goes very far away from any kind of action from the pawn, let's say it goes here and whatever, black can give as many checks as possible. If the king gets too close to the rook, we can already play rook e4 and take the pawn on e7. That's why it is important for white to not bring the king on d7 right away and try to avoid these annoying checks from a8 and a7. The best move what white can do right now is to start with rook g1 check. After that, this king has to go somewhere. King f6 will be a big mistake because of king f8. And now there is no rook f2 check because the king stands in front of the king and e8 will be unstoppable. Therefore, after rook g1, black goes with king h7. It is very important that black's king is standing very far away from any action. And right here, we want to bring the king to f7, but it's not really possible. By the way, king d7 leads to the same positions. We already discussed about it. There is rook a7. But in case of king f7, it is a mistake because, again, rook f2 comes next. If king e6, there is rook e2. And basically, we cannot go far away from this pawn. Always needs to be guarded. Therefore, instead of playing king f7 right here after king h7, white goes a very strong move, rook g4. The idea is to bring the king from f7, and whenever these checks will start kicking, basically, and you come back, when your opponent gives you rook e2 check, earlier we were forced to bring the king back on f6 to protect the pawn. But now we can actually cover it up with our own rook. So after rook g4, black plays, for example, rook d2. There's not much what can be done with the king, of course. So king f7, threatening e8. Starts with check, of course, king e6, rook e2, another check. King goes to f6, and here black plays rook f2 check. After rook f2, white responds with king e5, threatening e8 queen, and if rook e2, rook e4, and because white has lifted the rook on the 4th rank, now can cover up this threat, and e8 comes and becomes the queen very soon. I've seen this example a lot, and sometimes people don't even know what to respond against Rook e1 in these cases. Of course, you have a couple of options how you can respond onto that. One of the most common is instead of Rook e4 here, you should try to play Rook g5 with the idea of playing Rook e5. And you can also try to promote to the queen, even though I don't recommend it to try it all the time, because it might be a different case. Rook g5, Rook e5 looks like the best option. After Rook e8, there is King f7, attacking the Rook and threatening mate at the same time. And of course, Black cannot survive right now. This is also a very common position. I'm sure you will be seeing it a lot in the endgame books, called Philidor position. Black is down a pawn. White threatens to promote it with specific technique. Black is using the best defensive resource by putting the king in front of the passed pawn. In this case, Black can put up the best resistance in these positions. And how can White try to push for a win? White's main plan is to play King f6. For instance, Black just makes a random move like Rook b2. White wants to play King f6. And now, based on Black's reaction, White will do the same. Black cannot go for this passive defense like Rook b8, because there will be e6. Even though this pawn will not get promoted immediately, White has this option of playing Rook h7 followed by Rook h8, which obviously leads to winning position for White. If not Rook h7, Rook h8 ideas, Black can also try to give a check, but there is e6. Again, Rook a8 is a real threat, and if Rook b8, Rook h7 comes next, and after playing Rook h8, White wins the game very easily. Therefore, it is important to not allow White's king to cross the 6th rank first. So the best move here, instead of Rook b2, is to play Rook b6. It controls the 6th rank. If you give some checks, Rook a8, Black will be happy to play King e7, Rook a7, King e8. We just go back and forth, and not much is going to change. So if not this Rook a8 check after Rook b6, there's also another option of trying to make any kind of improvement, right? Because Black just goes Rook c6, Rook b6, and will be waiting all day long because draw is a desirable result for Black. White has to push the pawn on e6. But the moment the pawn crosses to the 6th rank, Black has enough time to come back Rook b1. Because the pawn is standing on e6 and White cannot put the king there. Imagine if the pawn is on e5 and the king on e6. There's no check from e1 square. But because the pawn is too forward there, White can't do anything else. Cannot hide from these perpetual checks. There will be Rook f1. In case of King e5, there will be Rook e1, of course, and it's just impossible to survive there. You can go with King f5, Rook f1, and if the king goes very far away from any action, already Rook e1 will be here, therefore Black easily manages to hold the draw. If you end up in these situations, you're down a pawn and your opponent has an extra b pawn, there is really nothing to worry about. Only critical pawns are from c to f file, so c, d, e, and f pawns. You have to be really cautious. But even if your opponent is comfortably placed on the 3rd rank and can activate the pieces easily, if it's a b pawn, it easily can be defended. All you have to do is just to bring the rook along the 1st rank, which is essential to avoid any kind of back rank issues. And after Rook g3, just to play Rook h1. All you have to do is just to stay Rook f1, Rook e1, whatever, and there is not a single thing what Black can do about it. If Black tries something like Rook g2 check, even though there is Rook h3, you still can just completely ignore it. These checks will lead to nowhere. You just go back and forth. If Black would have the c pawn extra, they would have c2 possibility after King c1, Rook a1. It's understandable. But in these cases, it just doesn't really matter because the b pawn can't do much. If Black goes with King a3, you can just move the rook literally back and forth, and there is not a single thing what Black can do about it. Just go back and forth. You can, of course, try to include Rook h3 at some point, but still. So in these cases, just go back on the back rank, stay on the 1st rank, and nothing ever is going to happen. If you're interested in more endgame content, you definitely need to check out this playlist, which includes the pawn, knight, bishop, and all kind of combinations of the end.